So welcome back to Bookworm. We have a little bit different episode for you today. It is my extreme honor to welcome a guest to the podcast, and that is Shawn Blanc. So welcome to Bookworm, Shawn.
Thanks, guys. Super excited to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Shawn, he has a lot of different websites with a lot of great content. Probably the one you're most well known for is the Focus Course, which I've gone through myself. I believe actually you told me at one point that I was the first one to buy access to the Focus Course. Is that correct?
You were I had a little pilot group, so you weren't part of that.
Right.
They don't count.
But
when it launched on whatever it was that Tuesday morning, you were the very first person to buy it.
Nice. Yeah. So I've followed Shawn for a long time, been a big fan of the content that you put out there. I'm a big fan of the Focus Course. It really is very well done. My wife and I actually went through it together, and we both got a lot out of it. So that's the number one place I'd say to go. You've also got tools and toys and the suite setup and a bunch of other things. Is there any one place you want to call out before we dive into the book today?
I used to always say ShawnBlanc.net was the spot, but I've kind of put everything into the Focus Course. We actually just started a Focus Course blog and a little book club over there as well. So that's kind of become the new hub, is on the Focus Course website.
Awesome. And yeah, actually, I have to give you credit for the whole idea behind Bookworm, because when you were doing the ShawnBlanc.net as your main site, you had a podcast for subscribers. So if you paid a couple bucks a month, you got access to this private podcast feed, which was always one of my favorite podcasts, called Shawn Today. And you dove into, I believe it was 4DX, the 4 Disciplines of Execution. And you broke it down into several different podcast episodes. And you actually had a term on there. You mentioned a podcast book club. And I was like, oh, that is such a great idea.
Wait. Hold on. So whenever we had this conversation about we were going to have a podcast and we were trying to figure out what the topic of it was going to be, and you said something about the podcast book club, you passed that off like it was your own thing.
The idea and spin on Bookworm, I'm going to claim as original. But the term podcast book club, I have to give credit to Shawn for that. Because
I have passed off so many ideas as if they were my own that they weren't. So I'm happy to let someone else steal my ideas, because I probably stole it from someone else, honestly. It's not original. Everything's a remix. We're be on here.
Well, all that to say that we're thrilled to have you on our version of the podcast book club. And I had just reached out to you on Twitter because I know that you had mentioned before that you had read this book, The 10X Rule, that we're going to cover today by Grant Cardone, and you had gotten a lot out of it. And so I just threw it out there and said, hey, you want to come on the podcast and talk about this with us? And you were gracious enough to join us. So
I love it. Yeah, what I love about this book is it's so it's divisive. It's kind of it's whatever. Like, people read it and they either are really put off by it, or they really love it, and it's kind of pushes people to one side or the other. And I think there's got it's an interesting book. There's a lot of good stuff in it, and there's a lot of I feel like the whole thing's just written in like all caps with exclamation marks after every point.
Yep.
I've heard the audiobook is way better because it's read by Grant Cardone himself, and so there's more of like that nuance and personality behind it. But I read the book. I didn't listen to the audiobook.
So do you think this is divisive? Because I guess I didn't realize it was a divisive book, but it makes sense now that you say that. But is it divisive because some people don't see, like, he talks about action a lot in the book, but is it because people don't see that there's a lot of action to be had from it, or they want something more tactical as opposed to philosophical? Does that make sense?
No, I think it's divisive because he has such an emphasis on taking massive action. And, that's kind of one of the core themes, right? Is if you want to have massive goals, you also have to take massive action. And he just overemphasizes that point continuously, because his whole premise is that people, even when people think they're taking massive action, they're taking like 1.2 more action, like just like a little bit more. And he's going, no, you got to take 10 times more action. So he really overemphasizes it in order to get his point across. And I think a lot of people take that. I don't know. My guess is that people are taking it too literally, and they're like, well, I got kids. I want to sleep a little bit. I'd like to be healthy. I would like to do a few other things other than only ever take action against my business constantly. And so it's like, no, like you don't have to, and I think we can talk about this. I put this in some of the talking points, but the concept that you don't have to apply this to like work 24 hours a day is not what he's trying to say. And so like just kind of chilling back, a little bit and saying, okay, with the time that I do have, the energy that I do have, what is going to be the most effective use of that time? And how can I make sure I'm taking, that massive action during the time that I have? And is there other time that I can free up to focus on the things that are important to me? And that's kind of the takeaway for me is that default, that bias toward action, but it doesn't have to dominate.
Yeah, exactly. One of the quotes that I wrote down from the book is from page 92. He says, most people make only enough effort to make it feel like work, whereas the most successful follow up every action with an obsession to see it through to a reward. I think that's why it's decisive or divisive, is that it's going to challenge you to put yourself out there, and it's going to challenge your definition of normal, the definition of the status quo. He's basically saying in a very aggressive tone throughout the entire book that that's not good enough. And I haven't listened to the audiobook either, but it kind of reminded me his whole, the whole color of the language that he uses and things like that reminded me of another audiobook that I did listen to, which was The Millionaire Fastlane by DJ Marco, I believe. And I both loved and hated that book because he just seemed like a pretty arrogant jerk at sometimes, because he's just saying like, this is the way things are. Like you can't do it normal way. You've got to do it this way if you want to get results. But also we actually just recorded yesterday on the Personal MBA, which I know is another book that you had recommended, Shawn. And we talked about reference levels and how in that book, Josh Kaufman talks about how you need to be constantly challenging your reference levels. I think that's what this book does a very, very good job of, is making you realize that what you have accepted as like, this is what I'm capable of, this is my capacity, this is what I'm able to do. That's not necessarily the case. A lot of times we settle for things and we accept less than we are capable of simply because we haven't had anybody like Grant Cardone kick us in the pants and tell us to take some massive action.
Mm-hmm. No, it's really true. I think it's just that mindset shift of, okay, if I want to improve how much action I'm taking towards things, my default is probably going to be to 1.5 or 2x my action. And I really need to think bigger than that. And how can I 10x it? And he gets into later, on focusing on the things that you can control. And I think that that's a huge, coupling that with the 10x action stuff is massive.
Yep, definitely. And so maybe let's back up a little bit and just kind of define what the 10x rule is. I think he defines it in the book as, number 1, assessing the level of effort necessary to realize a goal. And number 2, adjusting your thinking so that you dare to dream at levels previously thought unimaginable. And you kind of touched on it, Shawn, where it's just taking what you think you're capable of and just blowing it out of the water, not just 1.2xing, trying a little bit harder, pushing a little bit harder to see, if I were to put this thing out there, does it have legs? Will it fly? Can it survive on its own? But just completely changing your paradigm of what you believe is possible. And I'm kind of curious because you have a link, which we'll put in the show notes here, where you actually did this back in November. I'm kind of curious, have you started applying some of this 10X rule thinking to your business? And are there any changes that you would be willing to share? Like, this is how I've seen things change, or this is kind of what we've landed on, which we didn't really think was possible before.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting. I feel like we've kind of, for us over here at the whatever, like the Blanc Media Global Headquarters, it's me and Isaac kind of on a day-to-day basis, and what we're trying to do is, like, we've really kind of tried to install the 4 disciplines of execution within our office, and it's actually taken us well over a year to work through that book, read it, go through it again, and just figure out the lead measures. And anyone that's familiar with the book, it talks, there's a big emphasis on what your lead measures are. And Grant Cardone talks about this as well in the 10X rule with, focusing on the things that you can control. And that's kind of what a lead measure is. It's something that is influenceable and that you can control making it happen. And so like an example would be a lead measure for if I want to lose weight, if my goal is to lose weight, something I can control is how often I go to the gym and what kind of food I eat. A lag measure is like what my weight actually is. That's not something I can control. I can't just choose what my weight's going to be, but I can choose to go to the gym. I can choose to go running. I can choose to eat salads instead of hamburgers or whatever. And those lead measures of exercise and diet will directly impact my actual weight, which is the goal, is maybe to lose weight. So what we're trying to do is what are the lead measures we can apply in our business here for accomplishing our goals, and then stepping back and going, okay, now how can we take massive action against those lead measures, and what are the things that we can do that are really going to push things forward? And so that's anyways, that's kind of a little bit of the context. So what we've focused on actually is building relationships and producing more content on a regular basis. It's kind of been our core focus right now as our lead measures, and then try to take massive action against those things.
So your lead measures, lead and lag, that immediately made me think of the 12-week year. Have you read this one, Shawn?
I literally someone tweeted about it to me 20 minutes ago. So
oh, seriously?
And what's funny is I have it on my shelf. I bought it 6 months ago at the recommendation of Andre Chaperon, and I haven't yet read it, but I've heard really good things about it. And so anyways, Joe, tell me about that.
Yes, so you'll get a kick out of that if you go through that, because I know you're going through this whole 8-week cycle thing right now, because I got your newsletter earlier today. But yeah, if you go through that, he talks quite a bit, and I can't even place the author at the moment. That's how terrible I am. But he goes through this whole process of setting up goals for your 12 weeks and setting those goals as if they are annual goals, and assuming that you can do an entire year's worth of work in a quarter of a year, which would be 4X rule, not 10X. Mm-hmm. So even that's not quite big enough. So it's interesting that you brought up the lead and lag, because that's a big deal to the author of the 12-week year. Gosh, I cannot place it. If you look at the lead and lag, because this is something I've been doing, I've been trying to follow that 12-week year process. When I saw your 8-week thing, it made me think about that too. I was like, okay, I'm going to stick with 12. I got to get that under control first. But he spells out how to define your lead indicators of here's the things I need to do up front to make sure that I'm going to hit that end game. And something I've started doing is setting my goals for 12 weeks and then break that down per week and say, okay, here's where I need to be at this week in order to make sure that I'm going to hit that 12 weeks out. And then next week, here's where I need to be to hit that goal 12 weeks out. And then it doesn't matter where I'm at in the process. I can always look at it and say, okay, I'm not where I need to be this week, which means I need to do some extra work now, or I'm going to miss that goal. And it's a great way to see where am I at in that process. But that all comes from that 12-week year process, which sounds identical to what you were just talking about.
That's awesome. I need to read it, obviously.
Yeah,
that'll be for my upcoming book.
There you go.
It's very complementary to the 10X rule, and a lot of, like Joe was saying, a lot of the stuff that we're talking about right now. By the way, it's Brian Moran and Michael Lennington.
There you go. Brian and Mike. Okay.
But the whole idea behind the 12-week year is that you're going to take massive action. And like Joe said, it's not necessarily at a 10X level, but it is significantly more than most people dare to dream of. And then you work backwards and you kind of deconstruct what are the habits and what are the things that I have to do on a regular basis to make sure that I hit these goals and these objectives. And so I think it lines up real nicely with the newsletter that Joe was talking about, where you define this 8-week cycle. And I think you probably got this idea from the Sean West conference when you were talking to Sean McCabe, correct?
I totally ripped it off of Sean McCabe. He's been talking about his sabbatical stuff. So the 8-week cycle, just so people know what we're talking about. This is something we just implemented here at our offices on January 1st for 2017. And what it looks like is it's 8 weeks, and we break it up into 6 weeks plus 1 plus 1. And during the 6 weeks, we pick a very a specific project or outcome that is, it's kind of based on the action priority matrix, which is you've got the, on the horizontal axis is the amount of energy and complexity required. And on the vertical axis is the amount of return you're going to get on that energy. And so obviously something that's, way up top, but way over to the left is something that's going to be very easy to implement, but you're going to get a huge return on that time spent. And so that's like, hey, if you, as much time as you can spend there, that's the way to do it. And then obviously stuff that would be at like the bottom right is, stuff that's going to take a long time, really hard to implement and very little return. It's like, just avoid that at all costs because you're just wasting your time. So that's kind of our framework. So we got 6 weeks to work on something. What can we accomplish within 6 weeks that's going to have the highest return on our time spent? Because we got to be done within 6 weeks. And so that's kind of the idea. And we stole that from Basecamp. That's stuff that they do over at the Basecamp offices. And then we have a little buffer week. And then that 8th week, we take it off and it's a vacation or like a sabbatical, which is what Sean McCabe does with his whole Sean West crew. So yeah, I totally stole it from them. So yeah, we're trying to just take that 6 weeks and say, okay, we've got, we're going to try to really do something that's the most impactful, most effective. And it's interesting because, like when I step back and I look at the 10X rule and I look at what we're doing, I'm like, I don't know if I'm truly following Grant Cardone's recommendations to the letter, because I look at our goals and I'm like, these are really good, really valuable goals, but they feel realistic to me. And maybe that's just my experience in terms of just, I know what we're going to get done. And so I'm not going to 10X my rule and 10X my action just because Grant says I should. I feel like I'm doing the most that I can with the time that I have. And when I look at my day, I don't feel like I'm wasting, I feel like I'm wasting very little time. Obviously I'm not wasting zero time, but I'm probably wasting only 10 or 20% of my day, which I think is actually winning. Cause you can only do so much in a day, so I don't know, I don't know if we're 10Xing stuff, but I feel like we're really making significant movement. We're focusing on the stuff that truly is going to have the most return. And then we're trying to squeeze it into 6 weeks instead of, 10, 12, 14, a whole year or whatever, which I would imagine the 12-week rule, or the 12-week, was it the 12-week year?
12-week year, yep.
12-week year. I haven't read it, but Joe, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but he probably says that you're going to do it in 12 weeks. It's not, you're actually not doing more than you can. It's just, you're giving yourself a tighter frame, deadline, and work will just take the amount of time that it takes. And so if you just say, hey, we're going to do this in 12 weeks instead of 12 months, you'll just do it in 12 weeks and it'll be fine. Mm-hmm. And instead of wasting, the additional 40 weeks on something else, because, or tweaking forever, or whatever. It's like, no, you just do it in 12 weeks instead. And you'll probably end up with 90% the same result.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, in the last book, the Personal MBA, Josh Kaufman talks about Parkinson's Law, which basically the task will take as long as you give for it to be done. And yes. I'm glad that you brought up this whole 8 week and the sabbatical thing, because this was the one thing that I wrote down that I did not agree with in the 10X rule. He says on page 97, you can go all in with energy as many times as you want, because even if you fail, you can keep going all in. He says later, it's a myth that your energy, creativity, and efforts are material things with limited quantities that cannot be replaced. And I'm not sure that I completely agree with that. I think the key is that they don't get replaced unless you replace them, but that does take time. You have to have that margin. And I think that the whole sabbatical model that you've implemented is really, really important for long-term success. You have to have that margin. And that was actually another book that I had gotten from you, was the book called Margin. I forget who writes that one, Dr. Swenson, I believe.
Yeah, Richard Swenson. Yeah, Margin's huge. I think, Mike, the quote that you just recommended, I actually have that highlighted. I've just flipped to it real quick. I'm like, oh, I have that highlighted too. And when I read that quote, that your creativity and your energy are, they can't be depleted. I think when I read that, I thought long-term, because at least in my experience, when I read that, I initially thought of myself, of course, we always do. And I went back to when I first quit my job as a marketing creative director and I started blogging for a living. This is about 6 years ago now. And I remember this feeling of, oh my gosh, I've got like a couple article ideas, and then what? Like I'm screwed. And I just in my mind, I was afraid because I didn't have this long. I just had no idea how long I would be able to keep up writing original stuff and being relevant and keeping people engaged. But I just figured, well, gosh, I've been doing it on the side for a few years now, so I'll probably be able to keep on going for it. And so when I read that, that quote from Grant Cardone about that your creativity won't run out, that's what I thought of is like, if you have, if you're going for it and, over the long run, it won't go out if you're doing things well. And I think that's where the margin comes in, that kind of marathon pace of like, you need a little bit of breathing room. You can't just work 24 hours a day. And yeah, during a day, like an 8-hour work day, I just hit a wall where I'm done. Like my brain is done. I'm not being any more creative today. And so I'm going to either just do some administrative tasks or I'm done. I'm just going to leave the office and be done for the day. And so in that context, yes, it is a depletable resource that, Mike, like you said, you do need to recharge it. But over the long run, if you have that margin and you're doing things correctly, your creative muscle should hopefully get stronger and grow and improve and whatnot.
How many times do you read about some of the great authors of the past who had these crazy regimented processes of writing, where they had these schedules where they would write 8, 9, 10 hours a day, always starting at the same time, always ending at the same time? Like you hear those stories, and the question I always had was, holy cow, how did you manage to sit down and be creative for that long, for like every single day? How do you pull that off? And I think you're right. It's something that you build up over time, and the more that you use it, the more that you have, that type of thing. And
that's really true.
Whenever I read that, I think I was with you on that, Shawn, where I think midday, like sub-day level, or even sub-hour level, depending on how sensitive you are to it, you will deplete things. You need to take a break, and then they'll come back. Like you need to have that ebb and flow of working something hard and then taking a break from it. But I think if you're looking multi-year process and you're always trying to find what's the next big business I want to work on, if you're asking those questions and you're trying to be creative and use energy towards that, yeah, absolutely. It's never going to run out because the more you use, the more you have. Does that make sense? Am I off my rocker?
No, it's great. I heard, I think it was Scott Adams that said that creativity is like a car battery, or your mind is like a car battery, that it recharges by, through use, basically. So like if you want to recharge your car battery, you drive the car around. And so like that idea of resting well, and obviously like you can't, like if you're doing intense thinking, then it's like going to read or like engaging your mind in a different activity is actually going to recharge it better than just, watching television or something like that.
Yeah, I do that all the time. Because so I'm a programmer. I write code all the time. Well, at least I claim to. And if I'm stuck on a problem with it, like I've run into a roadblock with trying to solve a problem in how to write code, more often than not, I grab a book and go sit down and read it for a while. And I'm still engaging my brain in that way, but just engaging it in a different way gives me a chance to re-energize that same muscle.
Yeah,
sorry, Mike, I cut you off.
No, you made the point I was going to make, except I was thinking of the Huffington Post article, which highlights that the average American watches 35 hours of TV a week. That's what most people do to quote-unquote recharge, but like you said, it's really not helping you recharge anything. You have to do the right things in order to recharge, and I think that's where there's a lot of value here, is that for the average person who doesn't realize necessarily how much time they are really investing in things, they might think that they're really going for it. And if they were to really track their time, which is one of my action items, I want to start tracking how I spend every single minute of my day. So I have a record of, well, I felt like I worked really hard on this project, but I really only put in a couple hours this week. And that's where the whole massive action really is important, because you can feel burned out, and the natural response to that is, well, I just got to cut some things. I have to create more margin. And Grant Cardone is basically saying, I'm putting words in his mouth, but he's saying not so fast. He says, never reduce a target. Instead, increase your action. And so that's where I think this book is really valuable, is that he pushes you to take that massive action. And as soon as you actually do take some massive action, that's when things kind of fall into place. If you're going to take massive action on your side business, if you're going to finally write that book that you believe that you're supposed to have written, then the other things that, like the 35 hours per week of watching TV, the video games, all the other time wasters that you typically, quote unquote, use to recharge, those will fall to the wayside. In my own experience, I've found that the harder I worked on certain things, the more of those, quote unquote, downtime, like the less of that I had, up to a certain point, it actually didn't reduce the energy that I had to apply to the things that I wanted to work on. It actually increased the energy that I had because I was directing it in the right direction. And that's kind of what he talks about, I think, with the 4 categories of action. He says that on page 48, you can do nothing. You can retreat, which is what I would define going and watching TV. You can take normal levels of action, do the things that you know you need to do in order to maintain things. Or the 4th one, you can take massive action. And that's going to look different for everybody, determined by the specific application or what project or what thing you're working on, what thing you want to launch, what thing you want to do. But that massive action, that's where the breakthrough comes. So it's really important to recognize that what got you here won't get you there. And then, like you were saying, not just try a little bit harder, but just what would happen if I wasn't afraid of failing? What would happen if I just really did give everything that I had to this thing? What's possible?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love that. I like the idea of finding that massive action, finding the space for that action in the corners, basically on the fringes of how we're spending our time. And, I'm all for like Netflix, but not 35 hours a week.
Right.
Maybe like 3. I'm down for movie night and, catching up on my favorite show, but that's about it. And, 5 hours a night, every night of the week is, gosh, that's a lot. I don't even have that.
I was thinking that too. It's like, I don't think I have that amount of time.
Yeah, it's really astounding if you really sit down and think about, like, where are all the things that you really waste time. Shawn, you've written about the just checks, when you're standing in line and you're pulling out your phone because you want to see what's happening on Twitter. I've caught myself doing that. And if you really are honest with yourself, and that's where the time tracking comes in, because when you are time tracking, there's no gray area here. The timer is running and you're face to face with the record of how you actually spent your time. It can be really humbling. It can be really illuminating, but a lot of people don't think that they have the time to devote to massive action on side project, side hustle, whatever it is. Maybe it's even their core business. There's a lot of things, especially if you work from home, the tendency can be to do all of these things that feel productive, but if you're not doing the right things, if you're not really being productive, you need to know that. And so it's the time tracking for me. It really is where the rubber meets the road. It's a very telling. It's the tail of the tape. It's the plumb line that you talked about a while back. It's the actual measure of how you're spending your time, and then from there you've got a couple options. You can deny it. You can say, "Well, no, that's not really what I do. I don't actually spend 35 hours a week watching TV." Or you can say, "Well, yeah, I guess there's something here, and maybe I should fix this." What I really like about this book, the big takeaway for me, is that when you do the right things, you get the results. He talks about how success is not a zero-sum game, how just because one person was successful, it doesn't mean that you can't be successful. I think with internet business and stuff like your focus course, for example, you can look at that and you could say, well, Shawn beat me to it. I was going to do a video course on whatever topic, and I'm not going to do it anymore because there's already this thing that exists. But the fact that the thing that exists doesn't necessarily preclude the fact that your thing can exist too. A lot of times, actually, that's just and that should be viewed as an encouragement that there actually is a market for this sort of thing, because your take is going to be a little bit different than my take or Joe's take or whoever's listening to this take. They're going to have a little bit different angle. And Grant Cardone is saying that the world needs your contribution. Success is your duty, obligation, and responsibility, he says.
Yeah.
So I that just really hit me between the eyes, is like, failure is not an option. You cannot choose to be just merely average. Like, people need what you have. It is your duty, your obligation, and your responsibility to maximize what you have been given. You have to get that thing out into the world because there are people who are relying on it. They don't even realize it, but you have the thing that can change their life.
Right. And I love that. And because his framework for success is not, financial independence. It's that what you're building, what you care about, what you're trying to do actually gets traction and sees success and, manifests in the world, but also manifests in the way that it should. Like, it's not just the little early beta version. It's actually like a good working version of what it is that you're trying to build or put together or put out there. And so he kind of defines success in that context. And so when you look at it that way, then it really does make sense when he goes, it is your duty, it's your obligation to be successful, i.e., it's your obligation to take what you're trying to get, together, take what you're trying to build, what you're trying to do, and actually have it manifest in the world, which is awesome. I love that. And then when you pair that with the idea that it's not a zero-sum game, it's very liberating.
It's interesting, though, how many people don't see it that way. They don't realize that you can, like, if you go, to use some of Dave Ramsey's terms, if I don't go kill something and drag it home, if I don't go out and find something and do my own thing, then I'm not going to be successful. But they tend to think that if I'm successful, it's me taking success from someone else. Mm-hmm. And that's so far from the truth because, it's a matter of what I'm manufacturing. If I come up with something completely new for the market, I develop a new, say, touchscreen device that does something completely different than anyone's ever even thought of. If I come up with something like that, then you're creating a whole new category of success in that realm. You're making a whole new system at that point. And that doesn't mean that I'm robbing from someone else. That's probably a bad example because in that case, you're probably stealing from Microsoft and Apple a little bit. But that aside, there's still the process of coming up with something new and going out and doing things with the massive action to create something new. Because I think if you don't think of it that way, it gets easy to fall into a rut of almost the victim mentality of wanting someone else's success and trying to get it from them and being upset when you can't get it from them. And then you get frustrated. And then you go down this big, long pit of possible depression. And it's just not a good thing. But if you think about it from a different stance where I can manufacture this and I'm not reliant on someone else to do that. It's purely within myself to do that. That's where that's where it can have a big impact.
Yeah, definitely. And that was one of the things he said in here that I wrote down was don't be a victim. It's very tempting to play the victim card because then you don't have to take responsibility for the massive action. You're relying on somebody else to take care of you. You're relying on the system or whatever, the security of your job to provide for you and your family. And this whole book, I just feel, does a really good job of challenging you by saying that success is out there. And then he basically, like we mentioned earlier, it's your duty, it's your obligation, it's your responsibility to go get it. But it's up to you. Like, you have to make that choice. You have to make the decision to not think average and to think massive. He says, never set realistic goals. You can get a realistic life without setting goals for it. And I totally believe that's what a lot of people do is they focus on, well, what's achievable? And Shawn, you kind of touched on this when you're talking about your 8-week planning sessions. And I'm not saying that you're doing this specific thing, but I think this is the natural tendency for people is to say, well, what can we do? What can we accomplish comfortably? I mean, even with Asian deficiency, we consistently try to push what we are capable of in any given sprint. We try to see what the new normal can be. We don't just say, well, the most we've ever done is 80 story points, so we're going to do 75 this time because we feel that that's attainable. In our experience, regardless of whether we set the bar, at 8 or at 10, we're going to usually come up just a little bit short. We'll do enough to make it look like we can accomplish it, but then a lot of times something will happen at the end, and it's not something that you plan on, And, you've kind of coasted at the beginning, which is really what he's getting at, is like, don't take that mentality, don't take that approach to it. You don't have the ability to take it easy. You have to have pedal to the metal. You have to have the foot down on the accelerator. And I think that if you were to take that approach with a lot of different things, you would be a lot more successful. And I'm talking to myself too. I'm not just people who are listening to this, but if one, in the general sense, took that approach, you would get a lot more success than if you just continue to do what has been comfortable. And he says from a creative standpoint, you want to constantly be pushing forward. You don't want to be looking at what other people are doing. He says you don't want to compete. He says competition isn't healthy because it limits your creativity. That's very true. You want to be setting the pace. You want to be setting the tone for your team, your organization, even your family. We've talked on this podcast before how my wife and I will do family. We'll have our family meetings once a week, and we'll define what we're going to be working on. And it's very tempting to just say, well, let's take it easy this week. Let's just do this, and this. And there is a little bit of that. Obviously, you do need to make sure that you're maintaining that margin. But the whole idea here is that you have to be obsessed with this idea. You have to 10x your thinking first, and you have to be obsessed with this idea of success. You have to be able to see it. You have to be able to taste it. You have to be able to touch it. Like, it has to be tangible before, so you can not just compete and run at the same pace that everybody else is doing, but you have to be able to and willing to go above and beyond that. You have to operate based not on what you need. That will result in you just getting by, but you have to be completely obsessed with this thing. And that's another one of the action items that I wrote down is he uses the example of little kids, how they can get obsessed with stuff. And a lot of times from a parenting perspective, you think of that in a negative sense, where you think of the kid who's just like screaming in the grocery store because they want the candy and their parents not giving it to them. That's obviously an unhealthy expression of obsession. But if you can train your kids, and this is what I want to do, I want to train my kids to not suppress that obsession, but to channel it constructively, then really, like we tell our children all the time that you can do anything. Anything is possible. It really is, if you can channel that obsession in the correct way.
Mm-hmm. I think coming back, Mike, to something that you were talking about with, not reducing your goals and, not setting realistic goals, but being unrealistic with your goals, going crazy, 10xing them, and then just taking as much action as you can to try to push that. And then if you come short of your goal, that's better. Like, it's better to come, Grant Cardone talks about, it's better to set a goal at, level 100, and then you accomplish it at, 80%, than it would be to set a goal at level 50 and accomplish it 100%, because then you only end up with level 50 instead of level 80. And so that's kind of his point is, it's like, whatever, like, what, isn't there like there's a cheesy poster out there somewhere that says something about like shooting for the moon, and even if you miss, you land among the stars. Right? But that's kind of what he's saying. That's kind of what he's trying to say. And there's a couple points in here where he talks about when you set your goal, like taking action immediately and like getting started and focusing on the now. And this is from page 188 in the book. I'm just going to read through. He says, so he goes, now means now, not a minute from now. Start with the first things first. Make your initial list of goals and then a list of actions that will propel you in that direction. He goes, then, and this is huge. He goes, without overthinking it, start taking those actions. And then he has these 5 bullet points or 6 bullet points where he goes, first of all, do not reduce your goals as you write them down. So keep them unrealistic. Keep them big. Don't reduce them. He says, and then don't get lost in the details of how to accomplish them. Ask yourself, what action can I take today that's going to move me toward these goals? And then he says, take whatever action you come up with, regardless of what it is, regardless of how you feel. Take that action. Just do something. Get moving. And don't prematurely value the outcome of those initial actions yet. And then continually go back and review your list of what you're doing and what actions you can take. And so basically, he's like, don't overthink it. Just give your 10x rule, your 10x goal, write down a whole bunch of actions, and then just start going for it. Like, just move. As opposed to overthinking it, which is something else that Josh Kaufman writes about in the Personal MBA, about just the importance of making the best decision you can with the information that's available to you, and then just going and not overthinking it, not waiting, not analyzing, but just moving forward in that direction, which is huge. And so that's something that we're trying to do with our 8-week work cycles, is going, what can we do in this 6 weeks? And, and setting a goal that, obviously, like we're going, we think that we can do this in 6 weeks. We're not building something out that we know is just not going to be doable. But we're also saying, okay, we only can focus on like the most important actions to make sure that we're going to accomplish this, because we don't have time for anything else right now. So that's kind of been helpful for us.
Shawn, are you a getting things done guy?
No.
No? Okay.
I mean, I like keeping track of my tasks, but I'm not like a GTD methodology
Got it.
person.
It sounded a lot like that, which is why I asked that question, because the process that he talks about with spelling out the actions and then get to work, like that process of defining what comes next towards your goal and then getting to work. The thing that I don't like with GTD in that, if you think about, here are my goals and here are the actions that go towards those goals. What I don't like about GTD is that it sometimes if you follow it to the letter, it sometimes has this implication that it doesn't move very fast, that here are my projects, here's the next action for each one of them. I'm going to go through, check them all off, and then I review everything and define the next actions again. Like that process, and I'm dumbing it down a lot in that sense, but that process doesn't move very quick, at least in my use of it in that process. Maybe I'm doing it weird, I don't know, but it's the idea of taking a goal and then here are all the things I could do for it, and let's knock as many of those out today as I can. But I think the trick there is that you've got 1 or 2, maybe 3 big goals that you're shooting for, and then you're just busting those out as fast and with as much action as you possibly can, as opposed to what's the general rule of thumb with David Allen's thing, like 40 projects going on at a time or more, whatever
Something
that number
like
is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite a bit. I'm like, holy cow, that's a lot. But I have a lot, but I only chip away at 3/4 of them bit by bit every week. And, there's maybe 6 or 7. Those are the core of what I'm working on. I'm looking at this book thinking, okay, I've got way too many of these that I'm working on. I need to narrow down the projects that I'm working on, and then the ones that do get the chance that stay alive, let's go to crazy on them. Like, let's just take tons and tons of action towards those and get them until I hit that massive 80% goal.
No, I think that's huge. And I think that, like Joe, what you're hitting on there is a huge distinction, is saying, okay, I'm not going to take 10x massive action on all of my 40 current projects and areas of interest and areas of responsibility. Like you would just die. And so for us, like what we're doing with these 8-week work cycles is, we just have 6 weeks actually that we're focusing on a specific project. And right now we actually only have one primary project that we're working on, and it has to do with like creating some new products for one of our websites on the Suite Setup. And so like we definitely bit off a lot, but it's just one project. And so there's one thing, one outcome that we're trying to get. We got 6 weeks to do it. And what's cool when you have that and you kind of focus in, and it's just like, no, this is it. There's only one flag that's raised right now. And so everything we're doing is marching toward that flag. And so it's easier to take massive action because you're eating, breathing, sleeping this one project, the one outcome, everything is fodder for that. And so it's easier to really just go for it because you don't have to do context shifting. You don't have to manage multiple things. And so your energy gets behind that project. Like it's just, at least for me, I found like I just do way better work. And then in 6 weeks, we'll be done. And that project will ship and we'll call it good. And then we'll move on to the next one and we'll raise a new flag and we'll march toward that single flag instead of raising 10 flags and trying to take one step in the direction of all 10 every single day. It's like, no, I'd just rather take 10 steps in the direction of one flag each day.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And I think that that's the big benefit of the whole Scrum or Agile project management philosophy as opposed to the getting things done methodology is the sprints, whether they are 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, you've got a firm deadline that we're going to work really hard on this thing. And by this date, it is going to be done. And I think that's a good application of one of the things that I wrote down in the book. He says, if you're not creating new problems for yourself, you're not taking enough action. the way I interpret that is you put yourself out there, you say that I'm going to finish this by a certain time. And that's why we do the action items that we were talking about before we started recording. Why Joe and I throw it out there is because we know that if we don't put it out there, if we don't have a deadline for taking action on this thing, there's a good chance. I guess I'm speaking for myself. Joe, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
I'm good.
But if you don't put it out there, if there's not some pain associated with failing to meet this thing, then there's a good chance that you'll just take it easy, you'll coast, and whether or not somebody holds you accountable to that, if no one does that, then the tendency can be not to do anything. But like he says in here, success demands continuous attention. So I really like the idea of creating these problems for yourself, because then that forces your hand to be more creative and to exercise the muscle like you were talking about earlier. And you had mentioned a little bit about taking action right away. And Joe, I know this is one of the things that you wrote down, so I'm curious to get your perspective on this. But the whole idea of fear not being necessarily something bad or something to avoid, but he says on page 115, it's actually something you want to seek and embrace. It's a sign that you are doing what's needed to move in the right direction. But the key there is not to just sit and think about it for a while and try to muster up the courage to do it, because the more you sit and think about it, the more you feed that fear, the harder it is to actually overcome the procrastination and take that massive action.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah,
I think fear as a mile marker is huge, that you're on the right track. Oh crap, this might not work. That means you're probably doing something awesome. If you say that to yourself, then you're on the right track.
Yeah, I was coupling it with the last book we read, The Personal MBA. He had a whole list of, judge your business idea and vet that business idea with this criteria. And I'm not going to go through that right now. We just went through that. But the process of deciding what you're going to work on, you couple that with acting before fear sets in. And I put that down because I'm pretty bad about coming up with something that I think is a great idea, maybe even having tons of data and subjective information that says, yes, this is a great thing to work on. I may have all of that, but if I sit and think about it for too long, I can come up with an awful lot of reasons as to why that thing's going to fail. I can come up with a bunch of excuses and a bunch of, I guess, develop the angst around it to where I'm not sure I actually want to take action on it. And I'm pretty bad at that. So that's why I put this down, Mike, is I need to stop. I need to start paying attention to, if I've got an idea and I know it's going to be a good idea, stop thinking it through and then just get my tail to work and 10x the amount of actions I'm going to do for it. And don't sit on my haunches.
Right.
Let's get to it.
Yeah, page 118 and 119, he says, fear is one of the most disabling emotions a human being can experience. It immobilizes people, and often it ultimately prevents them from going for their goals and dreams. Everyone fears something in life. However, it's what we each do with that fear that distinguishes us from others. When you allow fear to set you back, you lose energy, momentum, and confidence, and your fears will only grow. And this might be a real good segue into this point here. I think, Shawn, maybe you wrote this down about the minimum effective dose. Mm-hmm. I think this is the antidote to the fear, is not take this entire project and say, oh, I got to do this thing right now, because the bigger that task is, the harder it is to create the momentum to actually start on it. But the way you define this minimum effective dose, this is kind of like the 80-20, the one thing that you can do right now that will get you moving in the right direction and provide some traction.
Mm-hmm. And what the whole mindset behind the minimum effective dose, right? It's if you take 80-20, right, which is the Potero principle, I think, right? Mm-hmm. Is that, I forget. It's the 80-20 rule. But then if you take that 80%, and then if you 80-20 that, and then 80-20 it again, you end up with 1% energy to get you to that initial of 50% results. Right. And so that's kind of the idea of what can I do that's literally, not even just a 20% energy that's going to get me the 80% results, but even just the 1% of energy that's going to give me the 50% results. And, that comes back to like what we were talking about earlier, like that action priority matrix of what is going to be as far over on the, to the least amount of complexity, the least amount of energy, and the highest amount of return on that energy spent. And when you focus on that and just do those tasks as often as possible, as much as you can, just the quick wins over and over and over, it like you were saying, Mike, it does help kind of move things forward without a focus on the big picture as much and the fear of failure and all that stuff.
Yeah, but the thing that you have to keep in mind with this is that it can't be optional. These have to be things that you feel like if you don't do these, it's gonna hurt you almost. Like you just cannot keep this thing inside. You really have to connect to the vision behind this 10x goal, this 10x vision that you have. And he talks in the book about how the higher your purpose, the more fuel it's going to provide for your 10x actions on page 151. And he talks about how nothing happens to you, it happens because of you. You can't fly under the radar and still expect to make it to the top. And so I think that there's a really important point to be made with these things, because the moment that you start doing these things, regardless of how big or small these actions are, the 80-20 of the 80-20 of the 80-20, and I think that's a really great place to start, is you're going to start taking action on these goals. When you start taking action, it's not going to be long before you are judged by people who are not taking any action.
Yep.
And at that point, one of two things is going to happen. They are either going to say that you're not taking enough action, you're never going to accomplish this thing, it's way too big for you, or they're going to be saying, well, why are you expending all of that time, all of that effort for this thing that's never going to happen anyways? And
or they're going to assume that you are now judging them and you think that they're lazy.
Exactly. Yeah. And that kind of gets into the whole excuses. He says on page 155, excuses are never the reason for why you did or didn't do something. They're just a revision of the facts that you make up in order to help yourself feel better about what happened or what didn't happen. And the note that I wrote down is like, this was the original definition of alternative facts, which has kind of been in the news lately. But it's interpreting, and we talked about this when we did the episode on the Personal MBA, Joe, like the data, how you can make the data say anything that you want. It can always give you a justification for your action or lack thereof.
You put me back on my soapbox? Okay, so for Shawn, all right. So we recorded the Personal MBA yesterday, and I used to be a data analyst for a corporation where I ran tons and tons of data. And I'm very sensitive to charts that display data and people being honest with those and being able to tweak how you feel about it or what you think it says, even though it doesn't actually say that. I'm hypersensitive to that. So that's what Mike's referring to.
Good to know. I think what I love about the approach toward excuses, sorry, completely just kicked you off your soapbox.
That's okay. It's probably better that way.
But what I love about Grant Cardone's campaign against excuses is that he doesn't justify the victim mindset of that doesn't work for me, or I can't do that, or that's fine for those guys, whatever. And I was recently in Chicago, maybe 6 or 7 weeks ago, and we were out there for this workshop that was hosted by Jason Fried and the Basecamp guys, and incredible workshop. And Jason is sharing all this stuff about the approach toward work that they have at the Basecamp company and their mindsets, and how everyone on their team, all 55 employees pretty much, have 100% autonomy of their time. They have all 40 hours of their week, freely available for them to work on the projects that they're working on. And he shared a lot about just their mindset toward work debt, which is, not creating, work debt for yourself, like not shipping a project that is half complete with the expectation that you'll come back to it later, and things like that. And they just had a lot of stuff that they were talking about. And I just kept feeling like, like lucky them. The rest of us live in the real world where, we have to do this, or we can't work like that, or, not even there yet. That's nice for you. And I just caught myself like thinking that, and I was like, no, like stop. Why not? Why can't I do this in my workplace? Why can't I incorporate this into my culture? Why can't I adjust the way we spend our time to better match what they're saying? That sounds really, really great. Sounds really helpful. Sounds amazing. Why can't we go in that direction? And it just, caught myself from like, oh, I can't do that. Whatever. I'm a victim. I'll never be able to be, I'll never be able to flesh that out, or I'll never be able to incorporate that. And instead going, no, like, why not? Why can't I go for it? And I think that, Grant Cardone talks about that with the excuses. Is like, no, those are, you have to take 100% ownership of the situation you're in and the results that you're getting and things like that. And it's like, you don't like your job? Well, you're the one that, applied, and so it's like, it's not your boss's fault. I mean, maybe it is a little bit, but if you put the blame on your boss, then you've now put yourself in the position of being a victim, which means you're not going to take ownership and you're not going to take action and do anything about it. And so sure, maybe it is your boss's fault, but don't think that. It's your fault. What are you going to do about it? What's your next step to move in the right direction? And I just love that mindset because it's so liberating, but it's hard. It's hard to get away from the victim mindset because we like to complain.
Yeah, it's hard and it's scary. It's to know that your future is in your own hands is, depending on your personality, either a breath of fresh air or it's completely terrifying and immobilizing. And one of the things that I wrote down, which really made me think, was on page 157. He says, if you make success an option, then it won't be an option for you. And it really just ties back to the whole victim mentality mindset that you're talking about, Shawn. And we've talked a lot about that whole idea of accountability and responsibility and how it's not necessarily you got to change the other person, but what can you do right now, this moment? How can you fix things? How can you put things right? How can you make sure that things are moving in the right direction? Not look back and try to figure out whose fault it is, but what can you do right now to change your course? And that's really the whole gist of this book, is that anybody at any given point, no matter whether you are 35 or 75, regardless of your financial situation, you have the ability to make the choice to change your future, but you have to do it. And if you don't do it, it's completely on you. It has nothing to do with your circumstances. It has nothing to do with the hand that you were dealt. If you make it an option, if you say, well, this has to go right, and this has to go right, and this has to go right, then by building in that, by building in the ability to justify your lack of success, he's basically saying that just the fact that you've built that in, you're not going to be successful. You're not going to hit your targets. But if you completely own the vision and you say, I'm going to do this thing, it's going to happen, it's just a matter of when, and I'm going to do whatever I can consistently at a 10x level to make sure that this does happen as quickly as possible, that's where the results take care of themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's great.
So you want to pivot into action items?
Yeah.
Speaking of 10x action.
Let's get to work.
Right. So I wrote down two of them. Number one, log how I'm spending my time. I'm starting to do that right now using an app called Time, Tyme, for the Mac and my iPhone. And I like the iPhone version because you can 3D touch and you can start and stop different timers. And it's not a subscription like Toggle or Harvest or any of those other ones that I found. So you pay for it once. It's a couple bucks, I think. And so far, I'm still gathering data, but I want to know for sure how I am spending my time, because I want to make sure that I'm using it to the very best potential that it can be. Other action item I wrote down, I mentioned this earlier, is do not suppress the obsession that is in my kids. Got 4 boys who are 9, 7, 5, and 3. So I see this on display every single day. They are stereotypical boys. They are 100 miles an hour. They are loud. They are crazy. They are a lot of fun. And I want to make sure that I don't kill their spirit, so to speak. I don't want to force them to conform to a mold necessarily about this is how you're supposed to act in different social situations. I want that passion to be there, but I want them to be able to channel it appropriately so that they can accomplish their goals.
Tall tasks.
Man, I love that. I got 3 boys myself, and yeah, that passion is there. Right now their passion is for taking all of their toys out of their room and into the living room, and then going back into their room to just play with something else instead.
Isn't it interesting though to recognize that is there in every single one of your kids at an early age, and over the course of time, if you're not careful, that gets suppressed, and that essentially gets killed, and you just fall into the status quo. You're going to go to high school, you're going to go to college, you're going to get this degree because this is what everybody is telling you that you need to do. You need to get a good job, etc. And it just makes me sad to think that is what they are naturally conditioned to do by our culture. And so we've talked about core values on this podcast, and we've got several of them that we have printed out and actually hanging on our living room wall. One of our core values is we want to be different. We want to be determined to be different. We don't want to settle for average. We want our kids to chart their own course. And it's really interesting to me to see that they all have that potential. They all have that ability. We just have to not mess it up.
Yeah, it's really true. We talk about, anyways, as long as we're talking about kids, we try to tell our kids, it's okay to be angry. It's okay to be frustrated. It's okay to be sad. It's not okay to hit somebody in the face when you're angry, or it's not okay to, yell at your mom when you're frustrated. And it's not okay to throw a fit in the middle of the grocery store because you're sad or whatever. And saying it's okay to feel these things. It's not okay to act in a way that dishonors other people. So that's kind of what we're trying to.
I feel like we might do. I think we talked about this at one point. So I'm the outlier here. I have 3 girls, not boys, and I just realized
you'll have the drama in a few years from now.
Yeah, I'm gonna be wearing like pink suits and stuff here before long.
That's awesome.
But yeah, my girls, they're 4, 2, and almost 3 months, so they're little. But yeah, they do a lot of the same with the toys things of dragging them out of their rooms or playing with them on the. They like to put them on the steps. And then just load the steps full of toys. Like, really? You're going to do that? You can't even go up and down you can't even get to your room right now. Like, you can't even... It's funny. Anyway, the action item that I have down, we talked about it a little bit, act quickly before fear sets in. Because I want to make sure that whenever I take something on, one, I do massive action towards it, which, as you were talking earlier, Shawn, with the process of narrowing down to very few goals, even one if you can. I want to do that narrowing process. And then whenever I do that, work on that particular goal or project quickly before I let my head get ahead of me. Because I feel like there's some instances where I'm holding myself back without realizing it. And I would like to overcome that. That's the goal.
Nice. Shawn, you got any action steps you wanna throw out there? Otherwise, I know this is kind of last minute, and you're probably not prepared for this. So we can jump over to the ratings.
I got all sorts of stuff I'm working on. Let's see here. Let me look at my little notebook. We're working on we're actually going to a conference next week in San Diego. So I don't know. I guess some of my action items are getting things prepped ahead of time, but I don't know. That's like dorky stuff. We're in the middle of our current work cycle. Like I guess I mentioned earlier, is we're building some new products specifically for the suite setup, and so kind of focusing on that. And so I'm kind of spearheading that project. So a lot of my action items are related to, we've kind of identified what some of the core areas that people are interested in related to using their computer, like based on some of our most popular articles and a lot of search engine ranking and things like that. So we kind of broke it down in different categories related to, email management, related to paperless office and things like that. And then we're trying to create, just some free stuff and some stuff that we're going to sell that, fits in line with those different categories. So I guess my action item is working on the email one right now.
Cool.
I don't know. But then I'll be done with it. I'll do that and then I'll be done. Your guys' action items are like, they're like lead measures for your life. Not suppressing the obsession of my kids, acting quickly before fear sets in. I'm like, I'm going to write an article about it now.
Well, to be fair, they're not all like that. I'd say that the good books that we read, though, they do challenge us to make those big, broad changes, which are sometimes hard to hold each other accountable to. Basically next time all Joe can really do is say, hey, did you suppress obsession in your kids? And it's just kind of a reminder for myself. But there's no necessarily data to go along with that where I've got a definition of done. All right, so let's jump into ratings. My name's on the list here first, so I guess I'll go first. I really, really enjoyed this book. There were parts of it that really kind of bugged me, but in a good way, where I know that the guy's goal was to challenge your definition of what's possible. And like we talked about at the beginning, kind of reset your reference levels. And in that context, I think that this book was very, very effective. I'm not sure I would necessarily like Grant Cardone if I met him in person. He makes some pretty outrageous claims in this book, but it completely resonated with me from a goal-setting perspective, and I believe that it really challenged me to just think bigger. And so, other than the one thing that I nitpicked at the beginning about how you have to have some sort of margin because you do not actually have an unlimited supply of creativity and energy, I absolutely love this book. One of my favorite books that we've read. I'm going to give it 5 stars.
Wow. Putting it up there.
Big spender.
So I love this book. There's a lot in it, and there's a lot to take away from it. The one thing I want to point out here is I wish he had more examples. I wish he'd told more stories about some of it, just to put a little more teeth to it, to help people see a little bit more of how that could be applied. I understand it's more of a head game that he's getting at. It's more about your mentality, so it's probably difficult to come up with those. But if I was going to criticize it, that's where I would put it. And purely based on that, some of my own experiences and preferences in a book, I'm going to put it at 4.0. So I'm going to counter your 5, Mike, and put it at that 4 mark. I think it's a great book. I think it's a great motivator. It's a great, it really can be inspiring to tell yourself not to think too low, to really up your mentality on what you can accomplish. So that's where I'd put it. Put it at a 4.
Nice. Sean?
I'm a huge fan of the book. Read it last fall. We actually picked it for our book club as part of the focus course in November. So we read through it in November. And that was after reading, we read Margin, we read Essentialism, and then we read, we come in and we read the 10X rule. And it was, you're reading these books that are about, you need breathing room, you need to focus on what's important, you need to do this. And then you come in and you read Grant Cardone and he's like, go, go, go. And I just love it for that. It's like, it's the same idea, but a completely different viewpoint and completely different language. And I love it. But the whole idea is, you want to be successful. You want to do the things that are important. And that's his point. He's not saying 10X your action towards retarded things. He's like, no, focus on what matters and then go hard after that. So I really like it for that. It hasn't drastically, it's not one of my life-changing books, which I feel like a 5-star book is kind of saved for that, but it's pretty close. I've recommended it to a lot of friends personally. I've bought it for folks, and we picked it for our book club. So I'm going to say 4.5. So, right in the middle there.
Split it.
4.5.
So you're going to go create the average.
Yeah, I mean, I guess time will tell whether my 5-star rating is deserved, but I believe that there are a handful of books that I've read that have really shaped my life, and I believe that this one has the potential to do that. I mean, obviously, we'll see in a couple of months if I'm still talking about the 10X rule, but at the moment, it feels that impactful to me. So it's my justification for it. Upcoming books. So, Joe, you've got the next one that we're going to cover for Bookworm.
Right. So the 10X rule was Mike's pick, and since we alternate, mine is up next, which is Rhinoceros Success by Scott Alexander. This is one of those Dave Ramsey books. So Dave Ramsey has a list of books that he recommends, or maybe he requires his new hires to read. I forget now. But I managed to get a hold of that list at one point, and this is on that list. So it'll be fun to go through another book on success now that we've read the 10X Rule.
Nice. And the one after that is my pick, and that is Step by Chris Capehart. And Chris Capehart is actually a guy that I met at a Christian Men's Network conference, and I really like his story. We're going to try and get him on the podcast at some point to talk about his process with writing the book. Very similar to my story, how I wrote my book. He basically just hustled in the margins, and his book Step is kind of talking about that. I've started this book. It's pretty good. So far anyways, where he talks about you've got this big project, you've got this mile that you want to run, but really in order to go a mile, you have to first take that step. And so this book is kind of about overcoming the fear to take that initial step in the right direction and then translating that into the energy to see it through to completion and actually accomplish some of those goals. So interesting guy, and excited about this book. Shawn, what are you reading?
Right in the same vein, I'm reading a book called Predictable Success. It's by Les McEwen, and he kind of talks about the 7 stages of a business, from kind of like the early struggle to having fun, some whitewater, and then this kind of then you're growing and then arches back down, and like the treadmill and the death rattle and things like that. And not every business goes through all 7 stages, but right in the middle is, he calls it predictable success, where your organization is internally running efficiently with high morale. People enjoy it. You have low turnover. It's a fun company to work in, and you're maintaining profits. You're acquiring customers or whatever it is predictably and profitably and things like that. So I'm reading through that, and it's really, really great. I just feel like he's just completely reading my mail as a small business owner. So it's really, really cool just to kind of feel like, like what I'm experiencing is actually not new. And there is a clear, things to look out for, things to focus on, what to move forward with. It's been really, really great. And actually, it ties in a lot with the 10X rule, because something that Les McEwen talks about in the book is at the different stages of business, what you should be focusing on, what your primary objective is that you want to focus on to get you to the next level of success for your business, and then what to focus on to keep you from losing that. So it's really great.
Nice.
Anyways.
We've got a couple Gap books here too. So Joe, you want to go first?
Oh yeah. So as we've been doing, Mike and I read a book every 2 weeks for Bookworm, but we're bookworms, so we also read a book in between those books. Books. The one I'm in right now is The Medium is the Message. Massage. It's M-A, which is weird to me, but it's The Medium is the Message. Anyway, Marshall McLuhan wrote this, and it's kind of an odd book. There's a ton of pictures in it. It's kind of a heady book, but its premise is that the medium by which you convey the information or the words that you're wanting to share, whether that be via pictures or words on a page, audio, through the television, whatever that medium is, it carries with it an impact on the message itself, and it can impact how you comprehend the words that you're consuming. So it's one that I just picked up this morning, so I can't give you much on it other than that. But it seems interesting, though.
Nice. My Gap book is actually a book that I picked up this morning as well, and that is Unshakable by Tony Robbins. And I'm guessing that this one is going to be very similar in tone to the 10X rule, since Tony Robbins is a motivational
Sounds
speaker.
like we're all stuck on success and massive action, and yeah.
Yeah. Well, this is kind of a follow-up to his money book, which I listened to the Audible version, and kind of a funny story. Tony Robbins has been speaking for so long, and if you go to any of his events, he's so high energy and he's yelling all the time that his voice is basically completely gone at this point. So he only read in the Audible version like the first chapter, and then they've got somebody else who who does the rest of it. But yeah, I really enjoyed that book, learned a lot from it, and so this is the follow-up to that.
Cool.
All right.
I started reading the Harry Potter series.
Nice. I've actually never read those.
And I try not to do business and like, motivational books in the evening because I just get, kind of wired up. So I started reading Harry Potter, and it's actually really fantastic, really enjoyable.
Heard a lot of good things about it. My brother used to be really into those. Well, I think that's all we've got for today. So, Shawn, where can people go to find out more about you and what you're doing online?
A lot of stuff we're doing is over at thefocuscourse.com. We have a book club over there if people want to sign up for it. It's thefocuscourse.com/book club. And it's just an email we send out once a month with a book recommendation. Pretty cool. And I'm on Twitter as @Shawn Blanc.
Cool. Great to have you on today, Shawn. For the listeners, if you have a book that you want to recommend to us that you want to hear us go through, you can do that out on our website, bookworm.fm/recommend, or if you just go to the homepage, there's a big button there that says recommend. That'll get you there right away. And if you want to see what else has been recommended, you can do that there as well. /list on bookworm.fm will get you the full list of every book we've read for the show, those that we have planned coming up, as well as every one of them that's been recommended so far.
And if you enjoy the show, we would really appreciate it if you would go over to iTunes and leave us a review. That helps other people find out about the podcast, and it's a great way to give us some feedback about what you like, what you don't like. We take all of the feedback seriously, and we want to make Bookworm even better. So please let us know what you think. And don't forget that if you want Joe to create us a script so that we can automatically log our focus, that you could do that bookworm.fm as well.
You had to bring that up. Of course you did.
Of course.
All right, I'm going to get there. So thank you all for listening today, and a big thanks to Shawn for joining us on our first little guest appearance here today. So big thanks to you, Shawn. And if you're reading along with us, the next book for you to pick up is Rhinoceros Success.